Hello, hi, I'm Alex Cox and thank you very much for joining me on this lovely Sunday morning. You're joining me live in London, in Findmypast's London office, and I'm really thrilled to be sitting here today to be giving today's webinar, which is titled The 1939 Register, the perfect place to start your family history. And it really is. I'm a massive fan of the 1939 Register, as we all are in Findmypast. It's one of our truly unique and special and powerful resources, and ever since it's been online, it has transformed the research of thousands of family historians around the world by helping people smash down brick walls, and just because of the nature of the document and the kind of information it records, as well as when it was taken, it really is the perfect jumping off point for anyone who's looking to start their British or Irish family history. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'd like to show you some really interesting videos made by some external experts and some special guests, which, will tell you a little bit about what you can expect to find in the register, explain some of the really interesting history behind the document, because it does have some fascinating history behind it, explain why it's unique and give you, tell you what kind of things you can expect to find in there as well. And also, I'm going to be showing you some very quick site demos, to give you a quick run through of how you go about searching the register, a few tips and tricks for getting the most out of it, and also I'm quite excited about showing off some of the really cool special features that some of you may not even be aware of. So a bit of general housekeeping. As always, we are here to answer questions, so it's not just me. There's a team of off-camera experts. I think they're dotted all over the world. I think we've got people in Ireland, the US, all over. Well, it might be a bit early for the lot in the US, but we've got people all over the show here to answer your questions. They'll be typing feverishly away throughout. So the second a question pops into your head, just pop it down. And they're there, they're willing, and they're very eager to help. And also, I will be answering some live at the end of the broadcast as well. So try to be gentle with me. No, I'm only joking. No, make them hard. I can do it. So without further ado, I will hand over to our first special guest, and it is a very, very special guest, the one and only Mr. Andrew Marr, who's going to explain what the register is and why it is so unique.
When war was declared in September 1939, the world shifted. This country was changed forever, and in many ways the people living here were inhabitants of what is now a lost land. But there are, it turns out, pathways back. Even as the sirens were going off and families were being torn apart and the lights were turned off, a vast national register was being compiled. With the details for England and Wales now online, this is a detailed picture of a people on the eve of war. This is the story of the 1939 National Register. In 1939, as Hitler's army expanded across Europe and Britain's attempts at appeasement seemed doomed to fail, Britain prepared for war. Shelters were erected, buildings were sandbagged, and children were evacuated from the cities. The Women's Land Army was reformed, and air raid precaution wardens were trained. In anticipation of a terrifying aerial bombardment, the whole of Britain faded into darkness. As Chamberlain's voice rose over the wireless, Britain waited for the conflict to begin.
This country is at war with Germany.
Much has been written about the Allied action and the bravery of the home front, but alongside heroism and resilience, every war requires a great deal of administration. To organise ID cards, ration books and later conscription, the British government needed up-to-date information on the whole of the civilian population. Britain wouldn't survive without it. And so on the 29th of September 1939, one of the most important documents in modern British history was compiled. On a single day, the details of 41 million people in every home and every institution in the country were recorded. In a time before digital technology, the scale of the undertaking was spectacular, but it's the detail the record reveals which is most fascinating. Now, for the first time, this record, the most comprehensive survey of wartime England and Wales, has been published online. You can search for names and addresses, explore maps, and read contemporary newspaper accounts to discover the details of lives and places which were about to change forever. How did the war change your world?
Andrew's just given us a fascinating insight into the historical context surrounding the 1939 register. But how do we actually access it? Simply head over to the Findmypast homepage and locate the 1939 register icon on the blue navigation bar at the top of the page. Click that and you'll land on this simple search page. From here, you can search using first name, last name, birth year and location. Enter as much information as you can to increase your chances of finding who it is that you're looking for. To give you an example of how all this works, I'm going to search for one of my own relatives, my great-grandfather, Arthur Crossland. I've already done a little bit of research into Arthur, so I know a few details already, and I'm going to use these details in my search. For example, I know he was born in 1894. That's a really useful detail, so I'm going to add that in as well. As you can see, that's returned quite a lot of results. Arthur Crossland probably isn't that much of an unusual name. But before I show you how to reduce the amount of results you get, I'm going to pass you over quickly to Audrey Collins to give you an idea of the kind of information you can expect to find in a 1939 register record.
Everyone who's in the register, you will get their full name and their date of birth, which is new because the census only ever asked for an age. An actual date of birth is really useful. Then you'll get each person's occupation and their marital status, and also whether they've been in the armed forces or not. And you get their address because that's how the records are arranged, by address. So it's quite a lot of information, not as much as had been gathered in some previous censuses, but still really useful because it should have absolutely everybody in it. They didn't miss people out.
So you've joined me back on the main 1939 search page. To make it easier to find my great-grandfather and narrow down that long list of results, I'm going to add a little bit more information to my search. To do this, simply click on the Advanced Search icon, which lives just above the blue search button on the main search page. You now have the ability to add all sorts of additional information into the search to help us narrow it down a bit. So, I know my great-grandmother's name was Nora, so I'm going to pop her in the search as well. This will really narrow it down. Searching for two people, I find, is always much better than searching for just one. I also know that they lived on Dovedale Road, so I'm going to pop that in too. And look at that. How perfect is that? That's come back with just one result. That's a significant improvement from last time. And I can tell but just by glancing at it that that is my great-grandfather, so that has been a very successful search. Now we've found him, let's take a look at the record itself. To do that, all I need to do is click either the page or the camera icons to the right of the search result. One will take you to a transcript and one will take you to an image of the original document. Let's take a look at the transcript first. Here, just by glancing at it, I can see all the basic information that was taken from the original document. So it shows me that Arthur worked as a cinema organist while Nora's occupation was listed as unpaid domestic duties, which is basically just a formal way of saying housewife. Let's take a look at an image of the original document itself. From this screen, I can do that by simply clicking, you probably guessed it, View Original Image. Wow, look at that, and there it is. That is the actual document the enumerator would have had in his hand the night he knocked on my great-grandparents' door that September night almost 80 years ago. And as you can see, this one even has bits of sticking tape holding parts of it together, a common feature actually in quite a lot of images of original documents. And there they are. That's the two of them. When I first saw this, I wondered who this John Henry chap was living with them. But if you actually look to the left, you can see their house number listed below him. So that he was basically living at the address above them. The closed records above and below just make it seem at first glance like he's part of their household. What other information can we glean? The OVSPI column will list a corresponding letter if your ancestor was an officer, visitor, servant, patient, or inmate. And as you'd probably guess, these columns mainly apply to institutions, say a record for a prison or a hospital. The SMW W or D column denotes whether a person was single, married, widowed or divorced. And as we can see here, Arthur was happily married, while poor old John Henry above is listed as a widow. Finally, the column on the right, headed C Instructions, relates to subsequent updates and wartime roles. And as we can see here, a little bit further down, one chap living on that street was a volunteer ARP warden. Right. I'm just going to nip back out of my great-grandparents' records to show you one more quick search feature, and it's a useful one too. Click the address side of this capsule-looking thing, it does look a bit like a tablet there, at the top of the search fields, and you can get a stripped-down search that's specifically geared towards finding a particular address, or addresses for that matter. Perfect for anyone who's interested in researching the history of the house they live in. Enter the village, town or city name in the top field, or the borough name if the address you're searching for is in London. The rest's pretty self-explanatory. As you can see, everything I've shown you so far isn't too dissimilar from what you'd expect to find in a census record. But the 1939 register certainly has a few more tricks up its sleeve. It is much more than a census. Here to explain is Findmypast's very own in-house military expert and one of the people who was instrumental in helping bring the 39 register online, our very own Mr. Paul Nixon.
What we've done, we've tried to put the 1939 register into context. So as well as seeing the information about your family in 1939, you'll see photos from the time, you'll see newspaper articles from the time, and you'll see maps as well. So you'll see where the people were living, going back to the Victorian era actually, and then in 1939, and then right up to the present day. So there really is a complete picture of the community in 1939.
Now I'm going to show you some of the fascinating additional facts and figures that the 1939 register can help you uncover. The information I'm about to show you is particularly useful if you're interested in finding out more about the areas in which your ancestors lived. You can access all these additional details very simply. All you need to do is keep scrolling down the page past the transcript for that household. And here we are. First up, we have a selection of maps from the local area, 3 to be exact. These Ordnance Survey maps give you the ability to compare what the area looked like back in the late 1800s, then when the 1939 register was taken, and finally in the present day. The blue pin you can see here shows where my ancestor's house was located. Here we can see that Arthur Crossland was living just down the road from Sefton Park and not too far from Toxteth. And next up, this is my favourite bit actually, we have a selection of fascinating infographics that give you the ability to compare the demographic makeup of your ancestors' local area against the rest of England and Wales as a whole. First up, we can see we have the top 10 surnames for Liverpool. Nothing too unusual here. Smith, Jones, Roberts, Williams. I was actually expecting a few more Irish names. But what you can also do is if you click on the lozenge at the top, you can click on England and Wales, which will bring up the same information for the country as a whole, not just Liverpool. I can also see household information, including the number of households in that area and the average household size. Another great feature is the ability to view age and gender demographics, letting you see a breakdown for the local area and again how that compares to the rest of the country as a whole. All this information allows you to tell a story about the area in which your ancestor was living. So in Yorkshire, for example, you tend to see lots of young men as forming the largest demographic, and as you'd expect, that's because there was lots of heavy industry, lots of coal mining. These young men were living there because they were working down the mines. You'll also see the effect of the evacuation, which had already began. So in areas such as central London and very urban areas, you'll see unnatural numbers of young children under the age of 16, and that's because they'd already been moved off out to the countryside. Keep clicking through as you can compare the top 10 occupations for both men and women. I do think this one's really fascinating. And the ones we're seeing here for Liverpool aren't too surprising. Shipyard dock worker is second place because at the time, 2/3 of the world's trade passed through Liverpool. It really was one of the most important port cities in the world. You can even view local wartime news reports taken from our historic newspaper collection, all of which are taken from our exclusive partnership with the Trinity Mirror Group. Next, I want to tell you about closed records on the register. If I scroll back up to the top where the transcript is, you will see 2 entries on Arthur's return that are showing up as closed. Now, why is that? Well, to explain, I'm going to pass you back over to the National Archives expert, Audrey Collins.
Because those are people who were born less than 100 years ago and who are not known to be deceased. Of course, as time goes on, more and more records will be released as more and more people pass the 100-year mark, and as people can produce proof of death for people born less than 100 years ago. So there will be more and more records added to the visible part of the site.
If you see a closed record that you know for a fact shouldn't be, it's really simple to request for it to be opened up. All you need to do is click on the button labelled Open a Closed Record, and the request form won't take all that long to complete, but you will need to wait around 5 to 6 weeks after submitting this request to access that record. See an open record that should still be closed? Simply click Close an Open Record and complete the request form. So there you have it, the basics of the 1939 register and how it works. Got any questions? Well, if you do, please send them through. I'm going to answer some live now, and also we have a team of off-camera experts who are all very eager and willing to help. Great, well I hope you really enjoyed that, and massive thanks to everyone who's been sending questions in. I've heard from the team that they're coming in thick and fast, and also don't be afraid to answer other people's questions. So if you see someone else in the comments asking a question that you know the answer to, get involved. We're all for that. We really want these webinars and these broadcasts we do to become a place where people can talk to each other and share their tips and tricks and advice with each other. So yeah, please do. If you see someone ask a question you think you can help, don't hesitate to do it. And also, the conversation doesn't need to stop once this broadcast's over. So the live Q&A will change slightly, but you can still carry on asking questions in the comments. You can still continue speaking to each other and answering each other's questions in the comments. And we don't just leave once this is over. We will be looking at the comments, and we will look for questions that are coming in later. And we may even answer them in some of our Facebook Live videos. I don't know if any of you know, but we do a live video every Friday on our Facebook page, which are essentially mini webinars where we talk about the records we've released, and we just answer questions. So yeah, keep on answering those questions. But now it's time for me. Oops, I think that was my phone. Now to answer some questions that you guys have sent in. So I can't see them all, but I can see ones that the team have been sending through. So the first I've got is from Megan Costello. Thank you very much, Megan, for sending this in. And this is, I can see why they've picked this one for me. This is a very nice, broad, easy one to start with, which is, what is the main difference between the 1939 register and a census? And this is a question we get asked a lot because, just looking at the forms, they look, at first glance, they do look very similar. But the main difference really is the purpose. So a census is taken every 10 years, whereas the 1939 register really was a one-off response to a national emergency. And for that reason, they were intended to do two very different things. So a census, so the guy who oversaw the 1939 register, the Registrar General, was called Sir Sylvanus Vivian Percival. It might have been Sir Vivian Sylvanus, but I think I might have got the order wrong. But anyway, he had a fantastically long name, a very interesting name as well. And he was a very smart chap, and he basically said, the way he summarised it was that a census is more concerned with gathering statistical information about the nation as a whole. It's not necessarily concerned with the individual. Whereas the 1939 register was a response to war breaking out. They used it for all sorts. It was intrinsic in organising rationing. It was essential for conscription. That you can't send all your coal miners off to war because then who's going to mine coal? And also, if people are doing heavy labour, then they need more rations. So it was really, and it was national security as well. So it was of the utmost importance that the government got this right. So for that reason, it's a lot more accurate and detailed than a census commonly is. So, for example, you'll get things like full date of birth, which in a census you'll only have birth year. Another big difference is the accuracy of occupations. So with censuses, people could kind of put anything they like down when it came to, their occupation. So that's why with the 1911 census, where you've got the original householder reforms that still survive, you see some quite funny, sort of quite silly but quite funny entrances. So, you see lots where people enter their pets down as members of their family. Or, I found one for a magician called the Great Lafayette, and I think he put down as his infirmity just too good. So people could have a bit of fun with it because they could put down whatever they wanted. That was not the case with the 1939 register, because it was so accurate. There were very, very strict instructions for what people had to put down as their occupation, and that resulted in over 9 million unique occupations being registered, which is insane when you think about it. So you can imagine the job the enumerators had, let alone the people who had to transcribe the thing. So they're different in terms of what they set out to do, and different in terms of what they record as well. But just a point on the occupations, I really love the infographics. You can see I showed them earlier, but yeah, they are just so accurate because, as I said earlier, people had to be so specific with what they did. So you'll see unpaid domestic duties is the most common occupation for women in nearly all cases. And that's because it basically relates to housewife, which back in 1939 still was the most common, one of the most common occupations for women. You also see lots of occupations that no longer exist. Things like the typing pool, that was another major employer for women. That doesn't exist anymore. And you see all these big old British industries. So when we say it's a snapshot of Britain on the brink of cataclysmic change, it really is, because you can see all these industries like coal mining, steel production, manufacturing. These were all the top employers, for men and women, and sadly they're industries that are no longer around to such an extent. So very different to a census, but similar at the same time, if that makes sense. So next up, just going to sip of water. We have a question from Sarah Turner. Thanks for this, Sarah. And Sarah's asked, my ancestor's name has been crossed out and replaced with their married name, but they weren't married in 1939. Why is this? Well, this relates to the fact that the 1939 register was a living document up until the mid to late 90s. I believe it was either 1996 or 1997 when they stopped updating it. And that's because it was the foundation for our beloved NHS. It was used as the building blocks for the NHS. So as you can imagine, a huge feat of bureaucracy and record keeping, of accurately recording the details of 41 million people. It was the largest and I believe most thorough the largest and most thorough audit of the civilian population that had ever been taken. So, as you can imagine, when the war was over, they had this and they realised it could be incredibly useful. There was no point in just storing it and shelving it away. So they kept updating it. So the reason you'll find that is because your ancestor would have been married after the register was taken, and her married name would have been entered in as a subsequent annotation. So you'll often see these in different coloured ink. So sometimes you see them in green or red ink or blue, where normally the register is written in black ink. What you will normally see though is the name they were registered under on registration night takes precedence, so that will always be first. I mean, one of my fiance's ancestors had like 3 marriages, so we've got all 3 of her married names and her maiden name in there as well. So just another really interesting little factlet about the 39 register, and that's also why we have the redaction process in place, the strict, stringent secrecy rules, because it was a living document up until the 90s. So one more question. This is from a John Jessup. Thank you very much, John, for sending this in. And John has asked, was anybody excluded from the register? Yes, they were. So servicemen, people who were already in the army, were not recorded at the time. That may be disappointing to some, because when the 1939 register was announced, I'm sure that a lot of people were excited to find out more about ancestors who served in World War II, especially as you know, World War II service records are so hard to come by. You need to write off to the Ministry of Defence and, you know, prove your next of kin and get a physical copy sent back. But while serving soldiers aren't excluded, it means that pretty much everyone else is, and we found some really, really interesting, famous faces in there. So, you know, even the royal family didn't escape the enumerators. They even knocked on the door of Buckingham Palace and, you know, registered the King and the Queen. And I love looking at those entries. They always give me a chuckle because, I mean, I'm sure the enumerator didn't speak to the King himself, but I'm sure he would have spoken to one of the members of the royal household. And it just must have been so funny because the names they're entered under are His Majesty the King and Her Majesty the Queen, and I think his occupation's listed as something like King of the Commonwealth, the Empire, and you know. So and not just the King and Queen, but on the same form you can see all the other household members, so all the members of staff, so all the different councillors and, you know, ladies in waiting and people who would have lived in very close proximity to them. Other ones to look at, which are really, really interesting, are the Foreign Office books. So Foreign Office books basically recorded staff at embassies dotted all over London, and you can actually look specifically for them on the search page. I think you can filter for them, and you know, you'll find all sorts. So the American embassy, you've got the Kennedy family, you've even got a young JFK living there. My personal favourite, though, is the Soviet embassy, because you've got Ivan Maysky, who was the Soviet ambassador to Britain during the Second World War, and was a very, very interesting character. He had quite a close relationship with Churchill because, you know, up until the Allies landed at Normandy, he'd be knocking on the door of, you know, he'd be petitioning Churchill and the war cabinet all the time because the Russians were desperate for the British to open up another front, because obviously they were effectively fighting the Germans alone for many, many years. So, you know, he's a really interesting figure, and you can see him in there with all his staff. You know, they've got fantastically Russian names. He's got a suspicious number of limo drivers, of drivers, sorry. It does make me wonder whether there's any espionage going on. But yeah, the Foreign Office books are genuinely fascinating, so do check them out. And yeah, anyone famous. We found Spike Milligan, you know, Agatha Christie, tons of famous people from the era in the register. So I can see those are actually all the questions I've been sent, but do please keep them coming in because the team is still there answering them. And as I mentioned earlier, once the broadcast's over, you know, keep adding them to the comments section, and, you know, keep discussing the register and family history in general. So I guess it's time for me to say goodbye. I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who's tuned in and watched. If you've enjoyed it, be sure to give us a thumbs up, give us a like, so we can tell you've enjoyed it. But we're here to listen to all feedback, good and bad. So if there's any ways you think we could improve on it, pop it in the comments and let us know. Also, if there's any subjects or areas that you'd like us to cover in the future, yeah, let us know. We'd love to hear your ideas. We really enjoy doing these, and we do them fairly regularly. So yeah, if there's anything in particular you'd like us to cover, do let us know. So I'd like to end with a rather lovely video that we made ourselves, highlighting the impact evacuation had on British families. Of course, very appropriate for 1939, because, you know, 1939 register is one of the few ways that you can actually track evacuees, because, you know, many evacuees had already been moved out of the cities by the time when the register was taken. If you look at the infographics that were highlighted earlier, you'll see, particularly in parts of central London, that, you know, the numbers of children under a certain age are naturally low, whereas in other areas like Sussex, you know, more out in the countryside, it peaks, and that is the effect of evacuation. But anyway, this video, I think it's really charming. I really, really like it, and I'm sure you will too. And a little bit of a fact for you: the letter that is being read in the video was written by a real evacuee on the 3rd of September 1939, so not long before the register was actually taken. So thanks again, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.